Kangaroos and Kiwis will be reunited on the 16th of April 2021. New Zealanders and Australians will be able to travel freely between their respective countries from basically midnight on the 18th of April. But it won't be business as usual in New Zealand, and in this video we'll have a look at what you need to know if you're planning a trip to New Zealand in 2021. Alright guys, so if you guys don't know who I am just yet, my name is Robin. I am one of the guys behind NZPocketGuide.com, which is New Zealand's largest travel guide. It's freely available for you guys to use. It's on NZPocketGuide.com, so check it out. Anyway, so before we get started, I'm just going to give a few caveats right here. And I really want to say that you should absolutely plan a trip to New Zealand as soon as you want to. The local industry here really needs your support more than ever, and the country is super empty, providing grandiose natural attractions all to yourself. It's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right here. So, in fact, we are actually going to be doing a video on this channel with the best places to visit in New Zealand in 2021. So, if you want to subscribe, just hit that subscribe button. Now that I've said all the nice things, let's get started with the not so nice things and things that you need to know about traveling in New Zealand this year. Let's get started with new travel conditions. So there are new conditions for entering New Zealand, and here are the major ones which come directly from Mr. Chris Hipkins, which is the New Zealand COVID-19 Response Minister. So here's 3 quotes. First up, travelers must not have had a positive COVID-19 test result in the last 14 days and must not be awaiting the result of a COVID-19 test during that 14 days period. Next up, passengers will need to provide comprehensive information on how they can be contacted while in New Zealand. They will also need to complete a pre-departure health declaration, and they won't be able to travel if they have cold or flu symptoms. So even if they are not COVID-19 related, if you do have cold or flu symptoms, you can't come to New Zealand. And lastly, the last quote is, when they fly, i.e. when Australians fly to New Zealand, they will be required to wear a mask on their flight and will also be asked to download and use the New Zealand COVID Tracer app while in New Zealand. We will talk about that COVID-19 Tracer app a little bit later in this video. So there are a few extra conditions on top of those, so you may want to do some research, but those are the main ones. Moving on to number 2. Not everything in New Zealand will be opened. Flights, so far we only have heard from Qantas, Jetstar and Air New Zealand, which have announced flights which are flying from Australia to New Zealand at the time of recording of this video. And the prices, they're really not cheap, so that won't be your cheap New Zealand holiday just yet. And the next thing to keep in mind is that in New Zealand, many operators went onto a hiatus, or basically went on hibernation during COVID, and it will take time for them to reopen and just restart, going at full throttle right here. So some operators also have closed completely. So sadly, an operator in New Zealand called Skydive Topo, for example, which was providing one of the cheapest skydive in the country, has had to close its door. So what used to be available in New Zealand before won't be available in New Zealand anymore, so you have to do even more research. We definitely try to keep NZPocketGuide.com up to date with all those information, so make sure to check out the website as well. And if you do find out some operators that have closed that are on the website, there are tools at the bottom of every single article in which you can report errors or mistakes on the site, and we address them super fast. Alright, moving on to number 3. Some companies are going to be very different than what they were pre-COVID. So if you see their reviews and their reputations and all these kind of things, they may be very, very different. I'm going to take one example right here, but it's one out of many. But Juicy is a company that rents camper van and cars in New Zealand. They also operate cruises in Milford Sound, and they operate hostels around New Zealand. They went under during COVID, and they had to heavily restructure during the pandemic. So you may want to avoid these kind of companies because they go through regrowing pain right here, and they may offer lesser guarantee and lesser good service as usual. So you have to do even more research than what you were supposed to do before. The next thing to point is that there are also signs of strong worker shortages here in New Zealand, especially in the tourism industry. So depending on the initial influx of tourists coming to the country, the services may be a little bit more hit and miss, as we are struggling to find enough staff to fill those positions. The staff that we had beforehand basically kind of went to different industries because they didn't have a job anymore in the New Zealand tourism industry. Alright, moving on to number 4, New Zealand can cancel flights with Australians any time. So what the New Zealand government did is that they did a kind of a traffic light system, which I'm going to put on screen right now so we can look at it together. And it means that if there are a certain amount of cases, or if those cases have certain amount of characteristics right here, they may basically stop flights from New Zealand and Australia's right here. So as you can see in the green, it's all good to go. If we look at the orange, so the quarantine-free travel, so that's what QFT is. So if there is a case of unknown source, but most likely linked to the border, then the state enter a short-term lockdown. So that will mean that flights to and from the affected states in Australia may pause for up to 72 hours. Now, if there are multiple cases, then we will put some states in longer-term lockdown, which means flight to and from affected state or states may be suspended for extended periods. So keep that in mind, that things can change really, really quickly during this period. So you have to be able to be flexible. Now also, one other thing to keep in mind is that the rules within New Zealand may also change at any time. The situation due to COVID-19 is very fluid, and New Zealand may get into some sort of lockdown, may require masks in public places and other kind of measures. So you may want to keep that in mind while you are traveling in New Zealand. Be aware that things may change along the way. Let's take a quick example right here. Literally yesterday, New Zealand has stopped all flights with India, even for New Zealand residents. New Zealand residents had the right to fly to New Zealand until now, but they stopped all of that, and this happened completely out of the blue due to the massive increase of cases, COVID-19 cases in India. So keep that in mind, things can change really fast. Alright, number 5, in New Zealand we do not have the COVID Safe app, but we have something called the NZ COVID Tracer app, and we're going to put some photos right here, even a QR code if you want to scan that, but if you're watching that on your phone, it may be tricky. Anyway, you'll figure it out. So it's a QR code scanning system, very similar to what you guys have in Australia, and it's kind of mandatory when you are going to be traveling around New Zealand, so download it right now to avoid extra roaming fees when you have to download it arriving in New Zealand. Anyway, just do your homework, download that app right now. Alright, number 6, in case of cancellation, you will kind of be on your own. So I'm going to go over a few points right here. So far we haven't seen any insurance company that have announced plans that will comprehensively cover COVID-related cancellations. And the Australian government has not announced any support to be provided if Aussies are to be stranded in New Zealand. In fact, the New Zealand government has announced that for Kiwis going to Australia, if there is another lockdown, another shutdown, there is not going to be any support provided to those Kiwis going to Australia. So it's likely that for Australians going to New Zealand, it will be a very similar situation right here. Now, there are some insurances that include some types of medical related expenses pertaining to COVID-19, but the conditions are really tight, so I personally wouldn't expect to get much help on this. I think that any kind of cost related to COVID-19 would be kind of a write-off, and you'll have to pay up front for all that. Okay, moving on to number 7, and speaking of paying, the prices in New Zealand won't be super cheap, so don't expect that everybody is desperate to get travelers and you're gonna get big bargains. New Zealand has never been really cheap to begin with, as a travel destination, but it won't be super cheap here in New Zealand. A lot of companies have to recover the lost income from the previous year, and so they won't be giving massive amount of discount this time around. You can still find a few discounted activities activities or discounted rentals here and there, but instead of being your classic like 30% off and all that, you may just find a 15% off. And even actually some prices have gone up for some activities. Again, we have full price guides and planning guides and everything on nzpocketguide.com, and when it comes down to price, we are entirely free. So here you go. That's a good saving already. Okay, number 8, it will be winter in New Zealand. If you're watching this video, that means that you're probably planning to come to New Zealand at some point quite soon. So make sure to plan accordingly, plan what you are packing and what you are planning to do very well, because New Zealand weather is extremely changeable in winter. So there is 4 seasons in one day. It's world famous. So make sure to keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that spots like Queenstown and Ruapehu are out to be super hot spot for the ski season. So keep that in mind when you are planning your trip. You are going to have some areas of New Zealand that's going to be a little busier than other. If you want more information on what to pack, what to expect during the winter in New Zealand and all that, check out nzpocketguide.com. Again, it's all free. I keep on plugging it, but we put our heart and soul into that website. Alright, number 9, make the most out of the super tourist spot in the country. So that's just a quick tip right now. I felt like I had to talk about this one. It's super rare to get New Zealand all to yourself. So there are some super touristic hotspots such as Lake Tekapo, Kaikoura, the Tongariro Crossing, Roy's Peak, etc., which are usually crowded with tourists. So those spots right now, they're going to be quite empty. So if you have them on your bucket list, it's time for you to kind of do a road trip around New Zealand rather than going to, let's say, Queenstown for just the ski season. If you can actually afford to actually travel around New Zealand and do a bit of a road trip, it's the best time to do that right now, because I don't know if they're ever going to be in our lifetime an opportunity to have New Zealand that empty. We've seen that a lot when traveling around New Zealand at basically in 2020. So yeah, make sure that you make the most out of that. And finally, my last tip and the last thing that you absolutely should know when traveling in New Zealand in 2021 is that you absolutely have to plan ahead. First up, in winter and especially after COVID, not all places are usually opened in New Zealand. I mentioned that previously. So now more than ever, make sure that you're going to be planning everything that you want to do, so you are able to do everything you want to be able to do and you see what is open and what is not. Second, you're going to need to book and plan pretty much everything before takeoff in order to do it all, because a lot of companies now rely on early booking, knowing that people are going to be coming in order to kind of know when they're opening their doors and everything. So you really have to kind of like basically let people know, let company know if you are planning to actually use their services. And as a quick pro tip, remember that in New Zealand, Airbnb is very much hit and miss. So consider also other options such as hotel, motels and hostels, which also have private room where you're going to get a more consistent experience throughout. Alright, so that should wrap it up. We've got plenty more tips on the channel, so if you want to plan an epic trip to New Zealand, you may want to hit subscribe. You can hit like to say thank you for all our hard work, and you can check out nzpocketguide.com for your complete free guide to New Zealand. The only thing that I can say to wrap up this video is good day, mate. We can't wait to see you all in Kiwiland. Bye bye.